Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as usual, let's go ahead and check out what happened in the market today and see what we can expect for the rest of the week and potentially leading into next week. So as you can see, Tesla finally having a red day-ish. I mean, it still ended up actually higher than it opened, which is not bad, but overall definitely a bit more of a brutal day, if you will, compared to at least the days that we've been seeing recently, right? So even though the candle is green, you can see that this time there was an insane amount of selling pressure all the way up here. The bulls couldn't hold it up, and it also closed lower than yesterday. So it is an overall inside candle, which overall shows indecisiveness, but it is pointing to a direction, which is to the downside, mainly because of the way this candle looks like. You can see there's a lot of selling pressure, and we closed lower than yesterday's close, right? So that's something to keep in mind. It's not guaranteed, but at the moment, the signs are pointing towards the fact that we are going to start looking to finally look for that retracement, that breather. And, most likely this gap fill essentially right here is what I am expecting. So you can see in the 30-minute, Tesla was kind of holding this uptrend for a while, and it just kind of broke down. And the second it broke down, it obviously started getting insane selling pressure, came back up to retest it. So far, it's having a little bit of issues kind of passing it. So unless we see it pass essentially somewhere around like 1096 or so tomorrow, in the morning, let's say, it's probably going to go ahead, fail this, and then start looking to cross back down, potentially get a small bounce here. But ultimately, I am expecting it to start going into this whole gap area that we have created and look for the fill. Personally, I'm going to be looking to start accruing some shares around this area. Not financial advice. It is what it is. Now, what is going to happen if that happens? So, okay, let's look into the upside first, because in theory, there is still, of course, upside potential. Now, the upside potential number one is, of course, like I said, to break around this, pretty much break back into 1100 to be safe, honestly. But you want to break back into the 1100 area. That is pretty important. And ultimately, you want to break above this kind of general 1112 to 1115 area as well. There's an insane amount of selling pressure up here, and it's failed it several times. You can see we came up here, failed it, came up here, failed it, came up here, failed it. So essentially, you can argue this is a triple top. And we know how triple tops work. We've seen triple tops before. We've seen how they played out somewhere back here. I think it was, might have been here. I think it was this right here. So it did it here. You can see this is like a 4 top over here. It did it over here, right? Top, 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 and then we kind of fell down. So essentially that's what's happening. A similar pattern is happening right around this area. So unless we can really start looking to break through this kind of, 11, 12 to 15 area and show like some real pressure, which I would be honestly very shocked if it does. I am substantially more confident in the fact that we are going to look for a retracement here rather than a push. It's not impossible, but I would severely not put, I wouldn't bet on this, essentially, is what I'm saying. I personally would not bet on this, though, again, with Tesla and the markets nowadays, you really just never know. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So if we break to the upside, however, again, I'm still mainly targeting this kind of 1130 to 35-ish area. I would be even shocked, I would be very shocked if we fall, or rather go above that. That would be pretty ridiculous. Not impossible, but highly improbable. Now, if we do fall down to the downside, what can we expect, right? So like I said, the first thing I'll be looking for is this gap fill. Now, the thing with Tesla and the thing with gap fill sometimes, especially on Tesla, is the fact that even though I do ultimately think we will properly gap fill it at some point, which is essentially around $1,010 roughly, I wouldn't be surprised if we maybe get a small bounce at 1040, and especially if we get a small bounce around 1020. Somewhere around that 1040 to 1020 area, I wouldn't be surprised if people start accruing and then we don't actually fully gap fill right away. And there's a small bounce before the gap actually fills. And the main reason I expect that is because, think about it, just psychologically, if you're watching this and you're looking to kind of play the potential bounce off of this gap fill, if you put in your buy order at, let's say, exactly on the gap fill, which is 1010, 1011, somewhere around there, well, if everyone's doing that, I'd want to make sure that I actually get the bounce. I would personally put it in, let's say, at 1012. But then let's say everyone else thinks that everyone else is doing that. So the point is that people are going to start putting their buy orders just slightly above it. Maybe 1014, something like that, maybe 1020 even. People are going to put it slightly above just to kind of make sure that they actually enter this play. and probably put a stop loss somewhere underneath like 1,000, right? People are going to probably start doing that and maybe start accruing the shares a bit earlier before the gap actually fills, because if everyone is putting their thing here, then there's a chance that their order won't fill. So you want to kind of get it filled a little bit, a couple dollars earlier. It's a pretty common thing to see, especially on Tesla. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't like fully gap fill right away, and then we get a kind of a premature bounce, if you will. Now, again, I don't think this bounce is going to be something to like be super excited about personally. I do think if a bounce does happen, let's say at 10.15. Let's just say as an example, 10.15 is where, you know, it bounces instead of 10.10. I wouldn't be surprised if we bounce like maybe 10.40 and then probably look for the drop. Ultimately, I don't think this will be the area where we just bounce and just continue riding up. I would be very surprised. If I had to, you know, essentially place a bet on it or take a wild guess, I still really think that at the very least, we'll touch 1,000. Like, that's without question. But I think between this 1,000 to 1,015 area, after the bounce to maybe like, you know, 1040, maybe even if we're lucky, like 1060, somewhere up in this upper range, I do ultimately think that we are going to get another drop down to the downside. And my ultimate target that I want to see, which I don't know, hopefully I'll have enough patience to wait and, you know, mainly buy the shares that I want here, but it'll be pretty hard because I really just want shares right now. But ultimately, if I had like the patience of a monk, I truly believe that we will get a drop to somewhere in the mid 900s to potentially all the way down to testing this teal line, which by the time we drop sometime next week, let's see, next week is, I think the drop will start tomorrow, potentially, or Friday. Next week ends on the 8th. So that will be somewhere around here. So that's actually a 900 drop. So at some point, I do expect a drop and a test of this teal line, this overall uptrend that we finally broke through. I mean, honestly, not even finally. We actually broke through it pretty fast, much faster than I expected completely. So that was pretty impressive. But I do expect ultimately to drop down to the teal line. And there's going to be a lot of buying pressure, in my opinion, around the mid 900s as well. So that's the first two things I'm looking at. Now, another thing to look at is, again, we talked about the moving average, the 5 moving average, which I believe is this bad boy right here, all the way up here. That's number one. You want to look at this. So until this breaks, I wouldn't call the downtrend guaranteed yet. Once the 5 moving average breaks and Tesla starts closing below it, I would say that is like a pretty big confirmation that, okay, now we're probably going to be gap filling. Even though even from now, if I had to take a guess, I would still be surprised if we don't gap fill. But breaking that moving average will pretty much mean that, okay, yeah, we're most likely going to be dropping down and gap filling this. That gives a very, very, like, it's an even higher chance. So let's say instead of a 70% chance right now, it'll be like a 90% chance. And then you'll have the EMA over here, the 11 EMA, that can also potentially serve as a bounce as well, which by the time I get down here, I do think it'll be probably right around the gap fill. So that'll be, you know, pretty nice to play around as well. So that's something else to keep in mind. So that's essentially the way I'm looking at it at the very moment. My ultimate price target on this overall mini correction, if you will be a drop to the mid to low 900s. That will be my ultimate price target, between 950 or so to 900 or so. There is a gap somewhere down here. Let me put down 10 minutes. There should be a gap, I'm pretty sure, somewhere in the very low 900s. Should be somewhere around here. Yeah, it's right here. So you can see there is a gap right here, technically never filled. We closed the 18th of February right around here. 18th of February, we closed at, let's double check it on the daily, just to make sure we get that most accurate. 18th of February, we closed at 905.39. So if we go back to that area, 905.39, we closed right here, right? 905.39, which is right exactly here. You can see that we almost gap filled it right here, but we actually didn't. So there is technically a gap still to fill, about a $2 gap that is to fill right at this 905.39 area. This never filled. And I mean, gaps, again, 9 out of 10 times, if not maybe even slightly higher, they fill. So again, I would not be shocked if at some point we do fill that gap, which would actually potentially coincide with this teal line retracement, right? That'll be pretty much perfect. However, for that to happen, this means that this drop would have to be pretty substantial. Like, this would have to be a pretty substantial drop within the next like 2 weeks. I would say this would have to drop all the way back down to the low 900s, which again, with the way this market's moving, is very possible. Again, just because we went up really fast doesn't mean that we can't drop just as fast, if not faster. Keep that in mind, guys. Usually the drops are more aggressive than the uptrends. Not always. Again, it's a wild market. It's a very hard to predict market, but you know, just don't be shocked if that, you know, there is a potentially like, you know, steep, aggressive drop coming up. Maybe not. But again, ultimately, if I had to take a guess, my price target right now is going to be a drop down to this mid-ish 900 range, where I'm probably going to accrue a fair amount of shares at 1,000-ish. and then I'll save some cash to accrue even more if we do finally get the drop to around this area. But yeah, so now let's take a quick look at the flow. So the flow you can see on Tesla is starting to get a little more bearish. There's more, where is it? There's more puts essentially being added into the place. You can see the open interest for the calls is still overall outweighing the puts, but the puts are starting to get much more aggressive, right? You have almost, okay, just over 13,000 for the 1,000 put again for this Friday. So that's getting more aggressive. I mean, the calls are still much more aggressive over here, but just because this is more aggressive doesn't necessarily mean that this will happen. And for all we know, a lot of these could have been closed already as well, right? So this is not really updating in real time. So we'll check back tomorrow again. But there's a chance that a lot of these were also closed on today's movement up to 11:15, which we did predict that might happen. So just keep in mind, guys, that there is going to a slightly more bearishness starting to roll in, and that can potentially lead into the drop as well. And also it's the final day tomorrow of the quarter, a lot of potential volatility and rebalancing happening as well. So it's gonna be a wild week, or a wild day tomorrow, and a wild close to the week. And I really do think next week might be a little bit of a brutal week to start off the month. But again, in my opinion, I would just want this to drop sooner than later, kind of get it over with, and then I think the rest of April will be a fairly good April. I really do. So I kind of want to just get this drop over with. I'd rather just rip the bandage off. Let's just drop. Let's just get this done with. I'm personally going to be buying this dip in this general range right here between 1,000 to 950. That's my buy area, if you will. And then I do think we'll bounce and then potentially come up to overall retest this red line properly, which by then could also come into an overall kind of a double to a potential triple top on the daily, which could be a little scary, but we'll see what happens. We'll get to that bridge when we cross it, or we'll cross that bridge when we get there rather. But at the very moment, guys, the first thing I'll be eyeballing is if we break to the upside. I told you already what I see there, but to the downside, which I think is more likely, is of course going to be a drop overall, ultimately to the mid 900s, if not slightly lower. But that's it for this video, guys. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.